Number 10. Dracula. The man, the myth, the legend, Vlad the Impaler. This dude was so down bad, he was the inspiration for Dracula. There's really only one reason why he was so evil, and honestly, it's in his name. Vlad the Impaler liked to impale people, oftentimes alive. As if this was the worst thing thought up by a human being ever, he would leave the pikes on display, creating a horror only the eyes of medieval Europe could see. There's gonna be a lot of bad dudes on this list, some really saucy villains, unsavory characters who will make your skin crawl, but only Vlad has been bad enough to get a monster inspired by him, essentially turning his actions into somewhat of a spooky mythology. Dude gives off some serious goth energy. There's a few portraits of him, but if you look at it, he's got this stare in his eyes, like he wants to impale me or something. Vlad be nimble, Vlad be quick, just wait till you see his sharpened sticks. Number 9. The guy everyone knows. Look, YouTube won't let me say his name, but do we really have to? I mean, it's Mustache Man. Infamous for his bad art and lame book, he was the fascist leader of Germany. The very same leader who forced the world into World War II. Remember that one? Yeah. He's the very same monster who organized the destruction of Jewish peoples in Europe, and if he had his way, probably the whole world. I wouldn't be surprised if you showed a picture of him to anyone on Earth, any country, rich or poor, and they will most likely know who that was. That's the kind of evil that will get you talked about in classes all over the world, and likely for a long time. Eventually, he got what was coming to him, and the world had peace and prosperity, and there was never ever another bad stinky war ever again. Why is he not number 1, you might be asking? Well, that's just because his numbers don't compare to others, which is a very troubling statistic. I'll get to that later. Number 8. Busy Man. Most people on this list are not going to need any introduction. Genghis Khan is no exception to that. The Mongol warrior king saw his nomadic empire stretch thousands of miles, being one of history's largest empires. If you've been paying attention in history class, and you should have been, don't skip class or Big Ched will put you in the naughty corner. Bad. Yes, that's right, I just referred to myself in the third person. Speaking of third person, that's how many people Genghis unalived in his bloody conquests. Oh, did I say 3? I actually meant a lot. Did I say a lot? I actually meant a disturbing amount. Some people like to point out that he was accepting of other people's cultures and beliefs. Yes, that is true, but that's after he burned down the village right before he got to yours, and you got forcibly assimilated into his numbers. As you can also imagine, a bloodthirsty barbarian like him did not treat women with much respect. It's Genghis Khan, man. That's just how it do be. Number 7. So long, Bowser. Ivan the Terrible. Okay, sure, Vlad was called the Impaler, but you can kind of take that in a different way, right? Not in that way. All innuendos aside, with a name like Ivan the Terrible, it's kind of hard to work around that. Even as a child, Ivan was showing traits of an evil dictator, or supervillain really, as it's said that he would throw animals off of tall roofs in the same way that Mario throws Bowser off of platforms. Becoming the first Tsar of Russia and probably its worst, he's responsible for many horrors and crimes, but the most infamous being his responsibility for his own son's demise. After a heated argument regarding his unborn grandson, and in a binding fit of rage, Ivan claimed his son's life. Sure, dads get angry when sons don't help mow the lawns or help take out the trash, but that's going a little far. One minute you're having a fight with your dad, and the next minute you're being carried out by Ghanaian pallbearers. You know, the dancing guys, the memes, the casket, you know? Yeah, it's a joke. Number 6, the Mad Doctor. I love doctors. Shout out to the people working in the medical field right now. I appreciate you. I couldn't even imagine the horror that is medical school though. We all know my track record for reading, and hours upon hours of studying would just be bad for my health. I gotta squeeze more video game time in there, it's just how I work, man. However, one doctor I would not want to cross is Dr. Henry Howard Holmes. He is most likely the inspiration for a lot of horror movies. A serial unaliver, said to have been performing surgeries on animals at a young age, which, again, doing some freaky deaky stuff to animals as a kid is like the red flag of red flags. It's like the only red flag. If that wasn't enough, he used to steal cadavers from the university he was studying at and doing all kinds of not nice things to them, naughty, bad. Having a clear obsession with medical practices and anatomy probably was helpful in disposing of his victims. And like something from Tales of the Crypt Keeper, that's exactly what he did. He constructed a large house, or building really, with trap doors, secret tunnels, and a lot of rooms, a basement where he could dispose of his victims. He would later then open this house of horrors up as a hotel where unknowing people would come to meet their doom.
Yes, Tales of the Crypt Keeper. Come check in to the Hotel of Doom.
Number 5. Bad Comrade. Stosif Jalin was the leader of the Soviet Union for probably too long. A man who worked his way up the political chain until General Secretary meant leader, which, if you look it up, it's kind of crazy. That itself is a crazy story. He's responsible for a great loss of life. It is estimated in the range of 40 million people. Ooh, yikes. Most spooky evil dudes usually go after an enemy, to someone they consider to not be part of them. He did do this, but a lot of his own people sadly met their ends from the Red Menace too. Organized and deliberate purges of people and famines to starve people. It's safe to say he is and was and always will be one of the worst humans to ever walk the face of the earth. To put it in perspective, Jalin's son was a soldier in World War II, and after being captured by German forces, the Germans thought they had one on the boss. Heck, this was a get out of jail free card, right? Well, when a prisoner trade was proposed by the Germans, Jalin laughed at only how an evil communist could, and denied the trade. His son would later perish in a POW camp shortly after. What a monster. You think you trade with me? Keep him, I don't want. Number 4. Fine white powder. Oh, to be in Miami in the mid-1980s. If I had one wish, it would be to spend a summer night in the neon-soaked beaches of Miami under strict laws enforced by a president who didn't know what was going on right underneath his nose. If you were around back then you probably got to experience something like that. Or at least in my fever dreams. I hope so. But as much as I'd like to be Tony Montana with all that sugar on his desk, I know it's bad for my health. Speaking of bad for your health, Pablo Escobar. I know, that's where I went with that. Probably the most ruthless criminal ever to live on planet Earth. Pablo was a poor man born in a poor country, but ended up being one of, if not the richest man on planet Earth. His lucrative distribution of adult sugar in the 80s made him very wealthy. It also made him very dangerous, as he was willing to do whatever to get his way. Extortion, bribing, bombing, just about anything you can think of. Oh yeah, he was one bad dude. He had so much money that he had to bury it all over Colombia. Every once in a while some of his buried treasure pops up. And as much as I want a quick million in US cash, I'll just put it back where it came from. Oh Dios mío, lo siento Pablo. Number 3. Al Capone. Another ruthless criminal, and honestly, Capone walked so gangsters like Pablo could run. Part of the ruthless Italian mafia that was the outfit, Capone worked his way through the ranks during 1920s Prohibition America, earning millions in his time where really just $100 could stretch a long way. Capone is noted for his violent behavior throughout his life and the many accidents he caused directly or indirectly. Prohibition and the Depression were hard times for a lot of folks in America. However, the media and the people of Chicago at first always wanted to see what the lavish gangster was up to, as his criminal life became somewhat publicized. Most likely due to his wealth. The dude was rich. He eventually would get arrested and sent to Alcatraz, which was probably the worst prison in America, or the best Call of Duty Zombies map, depending on how you look at things. I look at things through a Call of Duty way, so Number 2, Gavrilo Princip. That might not be a name that you're familiar with, but it was the man who unalived Franz Ferdinand, which started World War I, which caused World War II, which caused the Cold War, which caused the collapse of Soviet Russia, and it's why you live in a post-war globalist world with markets developing rapidly in the cyber world. Except maybe the whole thing in Ukraine, watch out for that. Kinda crazy to think how all that could come from one wrong turn and a guy seizing an opportunity. But this also means he's kind of responsible, in a way, for all the bad stuff that happened in those times as well. So maybe don't seize the day, I'm not sure. Just don't be ruthless criminals, guys. Watch our videos instead. Although I could blame them for failing my math test in high school. Yeah, we'll go with that. Number 1, Mao Zedong. I'd like to come out here and tell you all about the chairman of China, but that simply is just too hot for TV, and if it's too hot for TV, it's too hot for YouTube. Basically, he was the dictator of communist China and is responsible for many lives lost. It's estimated to be somewhere in the range of 60 to 80 million people. Whoa! Dude was down bad, the definition of down bad, and although many were told to adore him, there's still a great many people who remember the terrible things he's done. From Beijing to Hong Kong, there's not a person around who doesn't know who he is. If being a no-good, rotten person was an Olympic sport, he would have gold medals coming out of his ears.
Kicking off the list at number 10, Albert Fish. Albert is one of the oldest people on this list. He was dubbed the Brooklyn Vampire or the Moon Maniac. So that's great. Or the Boogeyman himself. Those are the 3 nicknames that he goes by. That's absolutely horrible. It's pretty clear that Albert was a terrible human being who did terrible things that I can't really say. But as his nickname hints towards, he did some horrible things, right? Obviously. In the early 1900s, Albert was arrested, tried, and convicted for killing and doing other things with his teeth to 3 people, but the horror was not over yet. No, Albert began to claim that although people knew about 3, that number was really closer to 100. And he even claimed that a lot of these victims came from every state. That's disgusting. And to make matters even worse, as if it wasn't already horrible enough, this deranged lunatic also sent a letter to the mother of one of his victims. He detailed everything about how he lured her and the rest of these horrific things that occurred afterwards, things that I can't say on this, YouTube box. This is one of those people that I'm not, sad at all they don't exist anymore. This is, I'm all about like rehab and treating people, but I'm like, just don't exist. How about that? You just stop eating people. Number 9, Robert Pickton. This horrible person is one of the worst Canadians to ever live and is one of our country's worst serial killers of all time. Pickton dropped out of school and began working at his family's pig farm, and this is where most of his absolutely horrific crimes took place, at this farm. He was first arrested in 2002 and was convicted in 2007 of taking the lives of 6 people, but throughout an extremely lengthy investigation, evidence of many more killings came to light. It's always more than we think, which is horrible. During his time in jail, an undercover police officer posed as his cellmate, and Pickton confessed to 49 crimes to him. 49. Apparently he was saying to this undercover officer that he wanted to take one more life to make it an even 50, and that he only got caught because he was sloppy. It makes me sick saying that out loud. It's disgusting. The entire trial was a bit of a mess, but it led to a life sentence without the possibility of parole for 25 years, which was the longest possible sentence under Canadian law at the time. This unfortunately does mean that he will be eligible for parole within the next decade. So, yep, let's move on with the list. Number 8, Robert Hanson. Robert is often referred to as the Butcher Baker, and his story is, again, obviously horrific. He's one of the most prolific serial killers in Alaska's history because for over a decade, he would kidnap women and bring them into the wilderness where he would then stalk them like prey. How do these people exist? I'm just not realizing that there's definitely an episode of Criminal Minds about this guy. There probably is, right? Sometimes the premise is so dark that it just sticks with you forever. This is one of those. The reason he got away with his crimes for so long is because outside of these horrific crimes, he was a soft-spoken baker. Yeah, he was a baker, like I said. One of my friends is a baker. I'm gonna message him. I'm gonna ask so many questions now. Robert was heading to church by day and then prowling gentlemen's clubs at night looking for the next victim. What led to the downfall of this horrible monster was this bad named Cindy Paulson, who changed history, okay? She was able to escape from Robert and was sure to leave evidence behind. She made sure of that. Then she went to authorities and told them what exactly happened, and this of course led to a search warrant for Robert's property, which is where all of said evidence was waiting. And then Robert was obviously found guilty. Robert is believed to have taken the lives of at least 17 women, and in 1983 he was sentenced to 461 years and a life sentence without the possibility of parole. So yeah, unless you got some Tuck Everlasting water, you're gone, pal. Number 7, Chester Turner. Chester is an American serial killer who on April 30th, 2007 was convicted of taking the lives of 11 women in the Los Angeles area. And on June 19th, 2014, he was convicted of 4 more that they were able to tie back to him. So again, it's more than we think. He's been referred to by prosecutors as one of the most prolific serial killers in the city's history. And if you know anything about LA history, you'll know that's pretty f***ed up to hear. In his original trial that led to conviction, Chester was sentenced to death, but at the following one, in 2014, he also received an additional death sentence. Nice, just an extra one, just for fun. Just throw on a couple more. In the end, like with a lot of these kinds of cases, in the end, DNA came to save the day and help authorities find out who was committing these horrible, horrible crimes. So, A1 for science. We locked them up, we found out. Number 6, Jeffrey Dahmer. Of course, we have to throw in Jeffrey Dahmer, one of the most well-known serial killers with his crimes taking place from 1978 to 1991. Your parents probably remember a lot of this. His crimes are far too brutal for this channel or this website, but he's known for taking the lives of 17 different people, I'll say that. At his trial, not only did he plead not guilty, but his attorney had some interesting words for the court. His attorney stated that his bloody pattern had caused him to believe that he himself was the devil, which was intended to, bolster his insanity plea and help him out. Again, that devil made me do it type of bullshit. His attorney said that he became enamored, overwhelmed, and caught up in the character in the movie The Exorcist 3. Said character was Satan because he was the personification of evil. Not only was Jeffrey found to be sane and ended up being sentenced to multiple life sentences in prison, but not too long after his sentence started, he was killed by a fellow inmate. I wonder if the devil made him do it. That'd be ironic, huh? Number 5, Sam Little. Known for being one of the worst serial killers in history, Sam has confessed to taking the lives of more than 90 people, and while authorities have only been able to for sure connect him to 30, they say they have no reason to doubt the validity of his other confessions. They're like, yeah, it probably happened. If he's saying it, sadly, it's probably the truth. Sam was able to continue on this horrible path for so many years because of the fact that he committed these crimes in different states and kept moving, right? Different counties, of course, made it difficult to connect his crimes to one another. Man was on the move. In an interview with an investigator named Sergeant LeBlanc, as they discussed religious beliefs, they spoke about the nature of sin. Now, Sam stated he had no fear of God and said that God made him this way, so why should he ask for forgiveness? He's just trying to like be cool or something, try to make his life a haiku. All of a sudden we're like, no, you're just a crazy person. He said that God knew everything he did. He also allegedly told a few select people that he believed that he was the devil. There it is. See, it's always something. It's always the devil something. Devil made me blank. It's like, okay. Number 4, Arnie Johnston. Speak of the devil, this one's definitely the most well-known one. Here we go. This one's a little bit different. It's now a cinematic adventure, apparently. This trial was well-known previously, but of course it became more widely spread as it was the trial in the newest Conjuring movie. That's what it was based off of. In 1981, Arnie Cheyenne Johnston killed 40-year-old Alan Bono in what appeared to have been a simple argument gone wrong quickly. It got way more twisted and confusing, right? When it came to his defense for the crime, he said the devil made him do it. Just like that third installment in the Conjuring franchise. The title, The Devil Made Me Do It, is in direct relation. This is not just a cool James Wan Conjuring title. This is the real case. This was the first time in history that possession has been used in an American courtroom as a defense. Pretty interesting, right? You think about it. You hear these stories often, but it has to go somewhere. It has to go to court. This was the first time that happened. Arnie had been at the scene of about 3 exorcisms that had occurred prior to his alleged possession and then his, killing. And this is why there's so many believers that believe that he's actually possessed or that the devil made him do it because he was part of these exorcisms or whatever. Because he was guilty by association, a couple exorcisms, so now he's evil apparently. At the end of the day, the jury in the trial decided to convict him of manslaughter. Number 3, Adnan Kolak. This Turkish serial killer who was responsible for taking the lives of 11 women, who were all ages between 68 and 95, absolutely horrible. He was also responsible for 6 more crimes once he was convicted that were also elderly women. So again, there's more than we initially thought. Now down the road, he eventually got caught for these horrible crimes, thankfully, and he was sentenced to 6 death sentences as well as 40 years in prison, just to make sure, just to top it off. Right? I would hope that's the case, make it 80 years. Sure, doesn't matter at that point. The point is, see you never. Get the fuck out of here. Now, this was back in 1995 when he was first sentenced, but cut to 2004, the death penalty in Turkey was abolished, which meant that in May 2005, Adnan Kolak was released from jail. His nickname is the Artvin Monster, and he was released from jail. Yeah, I have a nickname for him personally, but I can't say any of those words on YouTube, so I'll just save that for later. Number 2, Charlene Gallego. A match made in hell, it seems. This is twisted. Back in the late 70s, Charlene Gallego, alongside her horrible husband, Gerald, were the worst in Sacramento, California. They kidnapped and then later killed 10 victims. They kept them and then abused them for a while, horribly, before ultimately ending their lives. Now, it really was the most twisted situation. Just disgusting people, really. Cut to 1984, Charlene pleads guilty to murder and receives 16 years. Her horrible husband was waiting for execution, but he died of cancer before meeting his demise. One of those things where you're like, close, you got close. Charlene got out and moved to Fair Oaks, California, and has since changed her name. So one of them's dead, one of them's absolutely free, and changes her name. Yep, sleeping fair. And finally, number 1, the Zodiac Killer. Of course, this one had to make it on the list because, why, of course. There's a plethora of terrifying people on this list here, but nothing is as terrifying as an uncaught serial killer. And the Zodiac is definitely the most prolific of them all. The Zodiac Killer took the lives of 5 people in the San Francisco Bay Area between December 1968 and October 1969. He was most known for targeting young couples or a lone male cab driver, one of the two. Now, despite 2 people luckily and thankfully escaping his attempted evil doings, he still has never been caught. He was one of those losers, left notes and stuff for the police to find, thought he was like a DC villain, thought he was cool. One of those psychos. While no one's ever heard from the Zodiac since 1974, the case remains active in many different countries, and maybe one day we'll finally know who the real Zodiac Killer is. Starting our list off at number 10, Lilith. Lilith is a female demon, and sometimes she's seen as a sex goddess, so That's neat. That's a good way to start a list off right there. She first appeared in ancient Mesopotamian and Jewish folklore. In Mesopotamian mythology, she was a winged demon who preyed on pregnant women. Yeah, not so fun after all, it seems. And in Jewish tradition, Lilith was believed to be Adam's first wife before Eve, who, rumor has it, refused to submit to him and left the Garden of Eden to hook up with demons. Yeah, which is a little more of a different route than what we would have done. Instead, giving birth to monstrous offspring in, the underworld. I like that version more, personally. That one feels like a Thor installment. I'd watch that in IMAX. Over time, Lilith's story became associated with other beliefs. Today, it's kind of funny. She's seen as a feminist icon almost in modern times, but Lilith remains a prominent figure in various forms of literature, art, and pop culture. If you ask Siri about Lilith, it's really 50-50 about what kind of story you're gonna get. Sex goddess or demon? Who knows? Number 9, Spring-Heeled Jack. Heading to ye olden days, medieval England, Spring-Heeled Jack was a mysterious character slash demon slash, we have no idea, superhero? Not really sure. He emerged somewhere in the 19th century in London, England. He was described as a tall, thin, and agile figure with red eyes, clawed hands, and this one might be a little bit obvious, but he also has the ability to jump over buildings. So, again, pretty obvious who he is. Spring-Heeled Jack was known for attacking women, but often breathing blue flames and causing them to faint or suffer from shock. Yeah, more than fair with the flame thing. His identity and motives still remain unknown, with some theories suggesting that he was a supernatural being, or possibly, hear me out, an escaped convict. Yeah, he escaped by leaping out of the prison with his blue fire breath. Many believe that this was the infamous Jack the Ripper, because Spring-Heeled Jack the Ripper, I guess they're similar, but they both became a popular figure in Victorian literature and folklore, inspiring numerous sightings and stories. And he might be a demon, so who knows. Number 8, Apophis. Apophis was an ancient Egyptian god associated with chaos, darkness, and destruction. So more of a demon, I would say, on the demon list. He was depicted as a serpent or dragon and was believed to be the enemy of the sun god, Ra. Now, Apophis was thought to reside in the underworld, and he attempted to prevent Ra from completing his journey through the night sky. Yeah, what a nuisance, right? Hate when that happens. Trying to fly to work and then Apophis gets all up in my shit. It's the worst. I'm like, get out of here, dude. The ancient Egyptians believed that Apophis needed to be defeated in order for the sun to rise and then fall every day. So they performed rituals and spells to protect Ra and ensure, the continuation of the world. We wouldn't mind that. Apophis remains an important figure in Egyptian mythology and has been the subject of many artistic and literary works throughout history. Because, yeah, of course, who doesn't want to paint a demon dragon from ancient Egypt? I want to study that in school. Where was that? Number 7, Whiro. Whiro is popular in New Zealand. It's a figure in the mythology of Maori people. He's considered the god of darkness, evil, and death, set on harming humanity. Yeah, how lovely does all those things sound? According to the Maori mythology, Whiro was one of the children of Rangiuni, the Sky Father, and Papatuanuku, the Earth Mother. He was born in the underworld and he was jealous of his brothers who lived in the world above. More than fair. It's all hot and stuffy down there. I'd want out too. Fair. It was believed that Whiro could cause illness or misfortune to those who displeased him. So you better smash that thumbs up and hit subscribe. All that good stuff, just to be safe. Never know. Number 6, Lamashtu. Mesopotamian goddess of disease, infertility, and childbirth. Nice, real tender one, this one. She was believed to be a demon who preyed upon pregnant women only. So specific and so horrible. God, some of these are kind of cool, some of them are just all bad, like this one. Lamashtu was often depicted as a female figure with a lion's head, donkey's teeth, and wings. So a little silly, but also quite terrifying. This is what happens when Donkey and Dragon hook up in Shrek. You get this monster coming out. It's not so fun. When it's not animated, it's disastrous. It's a monster. Lamashtu was believed to have the ability to harm people through various means. Devouring them, stealing you from your home, causing you to fall ill, pretty much anything, no escaping this one. To protect against Lamashtu's influence, pregnant women were often given amulets or protective charms. Lamashtu was also associated with witchcraft and was said to have the ability to shapeshift into various animal forms, so be on the lookout for every and all of the animals. Could be demons, who knows. Number 5. Asog, not to be confused with ASAP, not the same at all. My autocorrect was not, I'm like, no, that's not the one. Asog is a demon from Sumerian mythology who is associated with disease and destruction. The 2 D's you don't want right there. Not D&D the fun ones, the D&D the bad ones. According to legend, he was born from the god Anu and the goddess Ki, but was rejected by both of them, yikes, because of his monstrous appearance. That's sad, that's pretty sad. They both rejected him because of his looks. Like, guy, you made this. What are you talking about his looks? That's half you. Asog is depicted as a large horned creature with a scaly body and sharp claws, said to bring chaos and fear wherever he goes. Yeah, definitely. Asog is often associated with the spread of illness and pestilence. Now, Sumerian mythology really did not like this one. Some versions of the myth would have Asog be defeated by the god Ninurta, who uses the power of the storm to vanquish the demon and, restore order to the world. Which, yay. So unless you have a storm lying around anywhere, it's gonna be a tough fight. You're probably gonna lose this one. Number 4, Floros. Floros is a fun one. As far as appearances go, he's a little different. Not so much a dragon this time around, so that's great. Floros was said to have the power to cause destruction and chaos. Now, according to some accounts, he would appear as a leopard or as a man with the wings of a griffin. Two very different descriptions, but I'll take it. I like the cheetah version a bit more. He looks so vulnerable that way. He looks like he's like naked, like he forgot a towel after he showered. I don't know. As far as demons go, not as intimidating. But as far as powers go, he packs a punch. Floros is associated with fire and is said to have the ability to control or summon it, just like that. How fun. Yeah, flame on, I guess. I'm never sleeping again. Floros is also known for his ability to reveal hidden secrets and to protect those who summon him. So if your homie's with him, you're good. Otherwise, fire and silly walks are coming your way. It's said he should only be summoned by experienced practitioners of the occult, so no amateurs allowed. Just people that are OG with the occult, and you're good. Number 3, incubi and succubi. 2 for the price of 1. Let's go, why not? Incubi and succubi, these supernatural creatures are from various cultural and religious traditions, so pick your poison. They're often described as demons that prey on humans during sleep, so yeah, say goodbye to your 8 hours. Incubi, they're male demons who visit women in their dreams, often for sexual purposes. Yikes. While succubi, they're female demons who visit men in their dreams. They're the Bonnie and Clyde of confusing dreams, I guess. In some traditions, they're believed to have been the offspring of fallen angels and mortal women. The legends of incubi and succubi have actually been used to explain sleep paralysis. So I hope that didn't just ruin your day. His and her demons. How cute. Number 2, Baphomet. Baphomet is a deity that originated in medieval European occultism and has since been associated with various mystical practices, as are all of these. They're just used many a times in many a places. Baphomet is typically depicted as, well, you've guessed, the classic winged humanoid disgusting looking figure with a goat's head and scary horns, but here's where Baphomet, dare I say, here's where they stand out. They're often seated on a throne with an inverted pentagram symbol. Yeah, this guy sounds a bit familiar, doesn't he? Baphomet has been associated with various occult concepts such as the union of opposites and the pursuit of spiritual enlightenment, which is, don't Google those, that's for sure. In modern times, Baphomet has been adopted by various groups and movements, including that of Satanism and the occult. This is our OG Satan right here, that's him, I guess. I say our, like I'm part of the cult, I don't know, that was weird. The earliest reference to Baphomet is a letter written by French Crusader back in 1098. So yeah, keep an eye out if you see a demon humanoid on the Iron Throne. I guess watch out for that guy, sure. And finally, number 1, Leviatar, the best for last, in my opinion. The goddess of death and pain, according to Finnish mythology. We'll finish with the Finnish. There we go. She's also known as the Lady of the North, which sounds like a character from Game of Thrones, but she was a little more haunting than the naked Red Witch was. Yeah, a little different looking, that's for sure. And she's believed to be the daughter of the god of the underworld, so daddy issues for sure, probably. Leviatar is described as a tall woman with pale complexion, dressed in all black clothing, and she's associated with disease, plague, suffering, pain, illness, all that good stuff, and is said to have given birth to 9 diseases. 9. Not 2, not 3, just 9 diseases. Couldn't get enough of them, just here, take them all, why not? Leviatar was feared and respected by the ancient Finns, and offerings were made to her in times of illness or calamity. Her influence can still be seen in modern Finnish culture and folklore. Again, creating 9 diseases, yeah, we're probably gonna talk about her for a few years. Like, don't do that maybe. 1, fine. Maybe 1 to build character, but 9 diseases? Too much.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have Belle Gunness. Belle Gunness was a Norwegian-American serial killer who is believed to have killed over 40 people, including her own family, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Belle was born in Norway in 1859 and immigrated to the United States in 1881. She settled in Chicago, where she married her first husband and started a family. This was all fine and well until things soon took quite the turn. Belle began to collect life insurance policies on her family members, and if you're a true crime fan, you likely know where this is going. She went on to eventually kill them in a fire. She then moved to LaPorte, Indiana, where she purchased a farm and continued to lure wealthy suitors to her property just to kill them for their money and assets. She was known for her physical strength and was able to bury her victims' bodies on her property. Belle's crimes were discovered in 1908 when a fire destroyed her farm and the remains of several of her victims were found. We love when the villain is brought to justice, but unfortunately Unfortunately, that did not happen here. Belle herself was never found, and it is believed that she may have faked her own death and fled the country. In our number 9 spot today, we have Dorothea Puente. You know the saying, don't judge a book by its cover? Well, this certainly is a case of that. If you took a glance at Dorothea and knew nothing about her, you'd probably assume she was someone's kind grandma who also had some cookies and a glass of milk waiting, but that could not be any further from the actual truth. In reality, she was actually a serial killer, and she decided to prey upon some of the most vulnerable people in our communities, people who were seeking help and assistance. Dorothea operated a large rooming house that was set in a large Victorian home in Sacramento, California. The residents who would often stay there were people who struggled with different substances such as alcohol, people who had been in mental hospitals, and the elderly. All of these people were receiving social security checks, and if they suddenly vanished, she figured no one would ask. In 1982, they did begin to vanish, but of course their social security checks were continually being cashed. As it turns out, Dorothea was taking their lives and then their money. She has now been called the landlady from hell. In our number 8 spot today, we have Yang Xinhai. You might be familiar with Yang already, as he is quite a notorious name in Chinese criminal history. Also known as the Monster Killer, Yang was a Chinese serial killer who killed at least 67 people between 2000 and 2003. Yang was born in 1968 in the central Chinese province of Henan, and he had a troubled childhood. He began his killing spree in 2000 when he started breaking into houses in rural areas and killing entire families. He targeted mainly farmers and migrant workers who were often living alone in isolated areas. Yang was eventually caught in 2003 after a massive manhunt, and he was found to be suffering from a mental illness. He confessed to his crimes and was sentenced to death in 2004. His execution was carried out in 2004 by firing squad, and his case is considered one of the most heinous and disturbing in Chinese criminal history. In our number 7 spot today, we have Pedro Lopez. Pedro is a man who lived a life committing some of the most horrific crimes I've ever heard of throughout South America in the 1970s. By the time the 1980s rolled around, he made a mistake during one of his awful crimes, and this thankfully led to his arrest. Once in police custody, he began to basically explain his entire life story, and he confessed to an astronomical amount of crimes. Police were a little skeptical of just how many crimes he said he committed, but Pedro was able to lead them to a mass grave where they recovered a total of 53 people's remains. Pedro, of course, went to jail, but get this, he was somehow released in 1994. I'm like, great. Just before I was born. Nice. He wasn't just sent home straight away and instead was sent to some sort of mental institution for 3 years after, but he was also released from there. So aside from the crimes he committed, are you ready for the worst part? In 2002, he was suspected of being the perpetrator of a new crime, but no one has been able to find him since 1998. Yeah, he just disappeared. That's awesome. Love it. In our number 6 spot today, we have another Pedro Rodrigues Filho. Also known as the Pedrino Matador, he is a Brazilian serial killer who is believed to have killed over 70 people, mostly other criminals, in the 1960s and 1970s. He did have quite a difficult childhood, as his father was a notorious criminal who actually really sadly harmed and killed his mother, so this of course had a profound influence on Pedro and his life. This experience is believed to have contributed to his violent behavior later in his life, and Pedro began his crime spree at a super young age, starting with a horrific crime when he killed the vice mayor of his town, who he believed was responsible for the death of his girlfriend. He continued to kill other criminals, often targeting those who had previously wronged him or his family. Pedro was arrested in 1973 and was eventually convicted of killing 71 people. He is currently serving a prison sentence in Brazil and is known for his outspoken and very unrepentant attitude towards his crimes. While I'm sure we can all feel sympathy for the things Pedro experienced in life, it truly is no excuse for the things that he chose to do. In our number 5 spot today, we have Lavina Fisher. You may have heard Lavina's name before, and that is because she made American history when she became the first female serial killer in the United States. Wow, what a title. Sure, her parents were proud. Lavina, along with her husband John, were accused of luring travelers into their inn in Charleston, South Carolina during the 19th century and then killing them so that they could take their belongings. The couple were known for their hospitality, and many unsuspecting travelers fell victim to their deadly scheme as a result. Some stories even suggest that they had a trap door in one of the guest rooms that led to a pit where they would dump all of the bodies of their victims. Despite the numerous accusations and suspicions surrounding the Fishers, they were never formally charged with the killing. However, they were eventually caught and convicted for highway robbery and sentenced to hang. In our number 4 spot today, we have Arthur Shawcross. This man is also known as the Genesee River Killer, and his crime spree began in 1972. In trying to navigate these online guidelines, I can't exactly say who he specifically targeted, but what I will say is that while everyone on this list is particularly horrible, Arthur's crimes were some of the worst, if you catch my drift. This story, however, is a little unlike some of the others today, because after the first 2 of his crimes, he was apprehended, but for some insane reason, they allowed him to have a plea bargain where he was allowed to plead guilty to just 1 charge of only manslaughter, for which he served 14 years of his 25-year sentence. In the least surprising turn of events, once he was released on early probation, his real crime spree got started. He would go on to take the lives of 12 women from 1988 to 1989, and thankfully he was finally caught for these crimes and sent right back to prison. Of course, his initial early release was the subject of huge controversy, rightfully so, and Dr. Michael H. Stone, professor of psychiatry at Columbia University, called this early release, quote, one of the most egregious examples of the unwarranted release of a prisoner. In the end, Arthur passed away in prison while serving a 250-year sentence. He passed in 2008 after suffering a heart attack. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Hwasong serial killer. This is the name used to describe a notorious unsolved criminal case that occurred in South Korea during the late 1980s. The killer was responsible for taking the lives of at least 10 women in the city of Hwasong between 1986 and 1991. The victims were all found, but there was little to no evidence left at the crime scenes. The case was highly publicized and became one of the most infamous serial killer cases in South Korean history. Despite a massive investigation and the arrest of several suspects, including a man who confessed to the crimes, DNA evidence ultimately exonerated all of them. The case remains unsolved to this day, with many theories and speculations surrounding the identity of the killer. The Hwasong serial killer case sparked significant changes in the way South Korea approaches criminal investigations, though, including the establishment of a national DNA database and the implementation of more advanced forensic techniques. In our number 2 spot today, we have Franklin Dwayne Alex. Franklin is a man who had quite an insane crime spree that lasted for about 6 months in the 1990s. Although short, it was anything but sweet. The spree started off in August of 1997 in Houston, Texas, and over the course of this spree, Franklin took the lives of at least 3 people. He committed robberies, he harmed people, he attempted to take more lives where thankfully the people survived, he kidnapped people. Literally any serious crime he could commit during those 6 months, he was doing it. In the end, Franklin was caught and put on trial for his crime spree, and he received a sentence of death, which was carried out on March 30th, 2010. Finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have Dale Hausner and Samuel Dietman. Known as the serial shooters, the crimes these guys committed are definitely on the list of fears I have, which I'm pretty sure spawned from a Criminal Minds episode. These two were actively committing these crimes between May of 2005 and August of 2006, and basically, they were arsonists who would randomly set fire to objects, but they would also drive around and commit random drive-by shootings. That's the really scary part. The fire thing is also bad, don't get me wrong, but there's just something about completely random violence that absolutely terrifies me. In the end, a series of tips is what led investigators to identify the perpetrators of these horrible crimes, in particular one from a friend of Samuel who explained that Sam had actually confessed to some of the killings one night while drinking. In Dale's trial, he was found guilty of 80 out of the 87 felony charges that were brought forth, and that was all in one single trial. The charges included the killings and attempted killings he had done, arson, animal cruelty, and the drive-bys. In the end, he was sentenced to death 6 times, and his brother, who was later found out to have assisted in some of the crimes, was sentenced to 25 years. Samuel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. While Dale sat on death row, he apparently asked to be put to death as soon as possible, and in the end, in 2013, he decided to take his own life. Samuel, however, remains in prison.
Number 10. George Chapman. Starting off with George Chapman, we're going back to the late 1800s for this piece of work right here. He began his career at first as a Polish doctor, but in 1888 he moved to London, and that's when things got a little more dicey. Once in London, Chapman sought out 4 mistresses. Not 3, not 2, not a side thing, not 4. Let's do 4 at the same time. George Chapman was a doctor, a cheater, and a killer. He poisoned all 4 of these women with arsenic. It was terrible. Chapman himself was executed for these crimes in 1903, but we're still talking about them because this guy was so bad, they thought perhaps he might have been Jack the Ripper, but that's since been proven otherwise, so yeah. Imagine someone being so bad, they're like, maybe he was Jack the Ripper, maybe he was just another horrible individual, who knows? Number 9, Arnie Cheyenne Johnston. Okay, this was the famous Devil Made Me Do It case. If you've watched the new Conjuring sequel with the same title, this should all ring a familiar bell. Well, it's based of course on a true story, all that's real. Back in 1981 in Brookfield, Connecticut, Arnie was convicted of first-degree manslaughter and the victim was his landlord, Alan Bono. Now, prior to this, about 2 months prior, the Glatzel family witnessed their son David host a demon. Right? David was behaving strangely, the family was confident this was the work from the devil, so they called in the pros. They called in Ed and Lorraine Warren. Now this was a process that lasted days, and witnesses say that the demon that fled out of the body of David was the same that took over Arnie a few months later. The same demon that made him attack his landlord. Yeah, Arnie was convicted and he served 5 years out of a 10 to 20 year sentence. Yeah, he was released on good behavior. Number 8, Albert Fish. Albert is one of the oldest people on this list. He was dubbed the Brooklyn Vampire, or the Moon Maniac, or even the Boogeyman himself. It's clear that Albert was a terrible human who did terrible things. I can't really talk about some of the stuff, but yeah, given those nicknames, you can piece it together. In the early 1900s, Albert was arrested, tried, and convicted for killing, and then doing other things with these people. Horrible. But the horror was not over at that point. No, Albert began to claim that although people knew about 3, the actual number of casualties was closer to 100. And he even claimed that he had some in every state. So that's disgusting. And to make matters even worse, as if it wasn't already terrible enough, this deranged lunatic also sent a letter to the mother of one of his victims. He sent a letter detailing everything about how he lured the victim and the rest of the horrific details that occurred afterwards. Number 7, Jeffrey Dahmer. Okay, Jeffrey is one of the most well-known serial killers, with his crimes taking place, of course, from 1978 all the way to 1991. His crimes are far too brutal for this channel, but he's known for taking the lives of 17 different people. At his trial, not only did he plead not guilty, but his attorney had some interesting words for the court, some interesting things to say. His attorney stated that his bloody pattern had caused him to believe that he was the devil, which was intended to bolster his insanity plea. Odd take, but sure. Again, the devil made me do it type of bullshit. Now, his attorney said that he became enamored, overwhelmed, dare I say caught up in the character from the movie Exorcist 3. Said character being Satan because he was the personification of evil. Not only was Jeffrey found to be sane and ended up being sentenced to multiple life sentences in prison, but not too long after his sentence started, he was killed by a fellow inmate. I wonder if the devil made him do it. Number 6, Richard Iceman Kuklinski. He became one of America's most prolific killers after being hired by the famous 5 families in New York City, okay? He had around a 30-year career as a contract killer, and while he only ended up being charged and convicted for 4 killings, that's still a lot, but he had claimed that the actual number was close to 250, so yeah. When we think of what an assassin would look like, he may not be at the top of this list, which may partially be what helped him be so successful in the first place. While he killed his victims in a multitude of horrible ways, he was dubbed the Iceman due to the fact that he froze all of the bodies. This was to ensure that the coroners would be unable to determine their true time of death, right, and really figure out who was doing it. Richard ended up passing away in jail in 2006. Yeah, we know the time of death for that one. We know that one very well. The Iceman, check it out, it's on Netflix. It's a good documentary. Number 5, Ted Bundy. One of the most famous killers of all time. Ted Bundy killed upwards of 30 people during his crime spree back in the 1970s. Now, most interviews with Ted are extremely well known and they're horrible, but there's one interview that's very disturbing that's not as popular as the others. In this interview, he's talking about taking the life of a student, Georgianne Hawkins. The chilling part of it is how he talks about these dark matters just so matter-of-factly, like it's a casual conversation between work friends, like it's not him describing the most horrible acts ever committed.
She had a Spanish test the next day, and she thought that I had taken her to help tutor me for a Spanish test. It's kind of odd.
Now, of course, over on Netflix, you can pick a number of installments involving Ted Bundy. There's Conversations with a Killer, there's a movie with Zac Efron. Choose your fate. Either way, the story that you're going to hear is chilling, so you've been warned. Number 4, The Staircase. The Staircase is a classic true crime staple, one of the most widely debated cases ever, as a matter of fact. Back in 2001, Kathleen Peterson was found dead in her home. Now, this docuseries follows the investigation, a few theories surrounding the case and the trial, but Kathleen was found at the bottom of the stairs of her home, and it's horrible, it's sad, it's tragic. And while it was originally regarded as fatal, but an accidental fall that caused her passing, as the investigation unfolds, the truth gets a little more murky. Kathleen's husband, Michael, had always been somewhere near the top of the suspect list onto what happened here, considering that 1, he was the last one to see her alive, and 2, was actually home and supposedly in the backyard when this fall occurred. So yeah, definitely a suspect for sure. We're gonna ask some questions. There's crazy theories surrounding this death. There's theories of Michael's infidelities all the way to a barn owl. There's a lot of speculation about this case, and this documentary is one you want to watch if you're a true crime lover. You're not really sure what to think afterwards, so comment down below. It's like this is chilling. This is a really chilling case. Number 3, Richard Ramirez. Richard, who is known as the Night Stalker, with of course a documentary under the same name. All these horrible people have documentaries. Richard Ramirez was a serial killer who terrorized the streets of Los Angeles back in the 1980s. He was known for invading homes, which actually initially made him dubbed as the Walk-In Killer. But he had another signature that was concerning to many people, especially during the height of the Satanic Panic. Richard was known for leaving behind different satanic messages at the scene of his crimes. Imagine walking in on that, that's terrifying. Because of his satanic signature after he left his first pentagram at the scene of the crime, authorities became worried that he was a Charles Manson copycat, but instead he was just his own kind of monster. It's said that he would leave more pentagrams behind while also telling his victims to swear to Satan instead of swearing to God. And during his court appearances, he would also hold up a pentagram, and after pleading not guilty, he said, "Hail Satan." So, yeah, quite horrible, I'd say. Number 2, Charlene Gallego. A match made in hell, it seems. Okay, this is a 2-for-1, so buckle up. Back in the late 70s, Charlene Gallego, alongside her twisted husband, Gerald, were the worst in Sacramento, California. They kidnapped, then they later killed 10 victims. It really was the most twisted situation. Disgusting, awful people. Cut to 1984, Charlene pleads guilty to and receives 16 years. Gerald was waiting for execution, but he actually died of cancer before meeting that demise. So, yeah, I guess nature helped out with that one. Charlene, on the other hand, she got out. She actually moved to Fair Oaks, California, and has since changed her name. You can sleep on that. Could be living on your street, who knows. And finally, number 1, don't f with cats. Okay, when I say this is one of the most captivating documentaries I've ever seen, I mean it, okay? I was late to the party for this one. I watched it way long after it was released, but from the moment I started it, I could not stop. This documentary follows the story of the killing of Lynn Jun, which is one of Canada's most infamous crimes ever. I wanted to end on it because, of course, I'm a Canadian. I saw this on the news when I was in school. Lynn was killed by a man named Luca Magnotta, who was already stirring up some internet buzz because he was posting some pretty horrific videos before this crime even happened. As the name hinted towards, he was with cats. That's all I can say. It's horrible. The documentary follows a couple of unbelievable cyber sleuths who saw Luca's messed up videos with the cats and who were intent on finding out who he was and where he was before this killing happened. They knew it was going to get worse, so they tried to track him down, and I'm not going to spoil the rest, but yeah, it's unbelievable. The crimes themselves are absolutely horrible. The story is almost unbelievable also, but the work that these I already said that, whatever. The documentary really has it all if you're a true crime person. It really is hard to watch because of how tragic it is and the situations are dark, but again, the ending is worth it. It's definitely worth the watch, especially if you don't know the full story. They get them. Spoilers, they get them.
Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot we have Nero. For this one we are taking it all the way back to the age of the Roman Empire. When we think back to these times, they weren't necessarily the most kind, peaceful of times, but there certainly are some characters that stand out as being particularly brutal, and one of those is Nero. Throughout his reign, he wreaked havoc on the Roman Empire, he burned cities, he killed thousands of people, including every member of his own family, and I mean, we know the inventive execution methods of the past, so you can probably guess at at just how brutal these all were. Most Roman sources give us an almost completely negative review of him in reference to both his personality and his reign as a leader. He was called compulsive and corrupt, and it is believed that he is actually to blame for the great fire that burned Rome, but instead he used the Christians as a scapegoat so that they would receive punishments rather than him. In the end, after being declared a public enemy by the Roman Senate and realizing that the rebellion would be lost, he ended up taking his own life at the age of 30. In our number 9 spot today, we have Shoko Asahara. Leader of the Shinriko cult, this person claimed to be the reincarnation of the Hindu god Shiva. He said that he was destined to lead his followers to salvation once the apocalypse came, but then once he lured in followers, he claimed that he could also teach them to levitate and develop telepathic abilities. Seems very legit. Apparently, those who were the most skeptical, he allowed them to drink his bathwater. No idea why or what this was supposed to be for, and I wish I could unlearn it, to be honest, but now we all just have to suffer with that information together. The cult continued to grow and drew in influential and wealthy people, and what did he do? Well, he made a science division of this cult, and this is where they studied the microorganisms living in his bathwater. I'm just kidding, it was actually really messed up. The group went on to attack Tokyo in 1994, which took the lives of 7 people. Then in 1995, they released gas into the Tokyo underground, which led to 12 deaths, 50 injured people, and more than 5,000 people with temporary vision problems. In the end, he and 11 of his disciples ended up being arrested and charged, and they were all sentenced to death in 2004. In our number 8 spot today, we have Victoriano Alvarez. Clipperton Island was an island that is located in the Pacific, and during the 18th and 19th century, everyone was trying to lay claim to it and rule it. I'm talking about Britain, France, Mexico, and of course, our friend Victoriano. He was actually the lighthouse keeper on the island, and in 1910, when Mexico needed to stop sending vital supplies to the island because they were focused on the rising revolution happening there, most of the inhabitants ended up contracting scurvy, which sadly led to their death. In the end, only Victoriano, a small group of soldiers, and about 12 women and children were left. The soldiers ended up passing away shortly after in an accident, so you know what Mr. Lighthouse did? He threw all but one of the rifles into the sea, loaded the one remaining weapon, and like the worst person he is, he declared himself king of the island. From here, he went on to kill anyone who disagreed with him, and he was also extremely harmful to the women who unfortunately were left on the island. That was until one badass woman named Tirza Randon simply had enough. She found a hammer and, well, the rest is history. In our number 7 spot today, we have Richard Nixon. This is perhaps one of the largest scandals and leaks in history, especially in the history of the United States. In the middle of 1972, there were 5 men who were arrested for breaking into and subsequently trying to bug the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate Hotel complex in Washington, D.C. As the year went on, the 1972 presidential election came closer, and there was an anonymous source who fed information to Washington Post reporters Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward that, quote, the Watergate bugging incident stemmed from a massive campaign of political spying and sabotage conducted on behalf of President Nixon's re-election and directed by officials of the White House. Despite this information leak and it being reported in the news, Nixon was still re-elected, but he was also under serious investigation. There were a series of Senate hearings, and the Senate even went on to create a special investigative committee. The hearings were broadcast nationwide, and they had witnesses testifying that Nixon had approved plans to cover up administration involvement in the break-in, and that there was a voice-activated taping system in the Oval Office. These hearings captured the attention of Americans everywhere for weeks, and in the end, the United States Supreme Court ruled that Nixon had to release these Oval Office tapes to government investigators, which then went on to reveal that he had not only attempted to cover up what went on, but he also later tried to use federal officials to deflect the investigation. Under the threat of an imminent impeachment, Nixon had no choice but to admit his guilt and resign, making him the only president to do so. His successor, Gerald Ford, ended up pardoning him, so he escaped prosecution, but there were 69 other people indicted, with 48 of them later being convicted. Remember that anonymous source who spilled the information in the first place? Well, his identity remained a secret for 33 years, until 2005, when former FBI agent Mark Felt revealed himself as the source. This is probably the biggest political scandal scale in US history, and it revealed corruption beyond what Americans at the time could believe. It truly changed the way that people would look at government leaders forever. In our number 6 spot today, we have Kurt Gödel. The Austrian-American philosopher and mathematician Kurt Gödel lived from 1906 to 1978, and he made quite a name for himself. Being compared to the likes of Aristotle and Einstein, he is best known for his incompleteness theorem, which was a very significant mathematical result. He was obviously very successful and found himself teaching and educating a younger generation, but his personal life is where things got quite dark. When he was just 6 years old, he had a case of rheumatic fever which left him quite ill for the rest of his childhood. This led to him first being pretty preoccupied with his health, and unfortunately this turned into hypochondria, which then led him down a path of complete paranoia. He ended up having an irrational fear of getting poisoned, so to avoid this he would only eat food that had been prepared by his wife, who also had to taste it beforehand. Sadly, his wife was hospitalized in 1977 for 6 months, which obviously left her unable to prepare food for him. Because of the fact that she was unable to do this for him, during this period he refused to eat, which eventually led to him starving to death. In our number 5 spot today, we have Albert Fall. Albert Fall was the Secretary of the Interior to former President Warren G. Harding, and while in this position, he decided to secretly allow oil companies to tap into the Teapot Dome oil reserve in Wyoming and the Elk Hills oil reserve in California. Of course, the reason he did this is because he could make a ton of extra money doing this, like several $100,000. This all started to unravel though in 1922 when there was an expose that revealed that the oil had been sold without any sort of competitive bidding. After this expose, Robert La Follette, who was a senator from Wisconsin, created an investigation into the story by the Senate Committee on Public Lands. The Attorney General at the time, Harry Dougherty, began to get some flack for not investigating this alleged corruption, so Harry turned to the FBI director to help him out. The FBI director, William J. Burns, sent an agent to Robert, the senator from Wisconsin's office, to search for anything that could be used to blackmail him into stopping the investigation into the corruption. Despite this seemingly obvious threat, Robert knew that this meant that his investigation was going to reveal something serious, which motivated him to continue on with it. In the end, the shady dealings and all of the bribery was revealed, and Albert Fall was officially exposed. This entire ordeal led to him being the first United States cabinet secretary to go to prison. In our number 4 spot today, we have Velvely Dickinson. Velvely is a name I've never heard before, and I thought it sounded kind of cool and nice until I heard about the person it belonged to. Velvely is one of the reasons why we should never judge a book by its cover. On the outside, she appeared to be like a regular older lady who ran a doll store. Who would think the owner of a doll store would ever be a villain? Okay, maybe everyone. But anyway, as far as I know, everything started out more normal, but once her husband passed away from a heart attack, things took a very sinister twist as she started to take on some interesting side projects for a little extra cash. In 1942, the FBI was able to intercept a letter that was on its way to Buenos Aires. The letter spoke of a quote, wonderful doll hospital and quote, 3 old English dolls, and the FBI was like, hey, that's kind of weird. So their cryptographers went to work, and it was uncovered that this letter was actually sent in code. As it turns out, these letters were actually sending military secrets to Japan, and some of the information within them would have been extremely valuable if the letter hadn't been intercepted and never delivered. Turns out that Velvely had visited the Japanese Institute in New York, befriended the consul general, and connected with a Japanese naval attaché. The FBI arrested Dickinson, and upon doing so, they found huge amounts of cash along with the instructions for the code she was to use in the letters. She ended up being sentenced to 10 years in prison. In our number 3 spot today, we have Monica Witt. Monica is a former United States Air Force technical sergeant as well as defense contractor who has been on the run since 2018. Despite her high-ranking position and high security clearance, she is on the run because she defected to Iran in 2013. It is said that from 2013 up until she was found out that she was using her position in order to spy on the United States and relay that information back to the group she was working for. She used different fake Facebook accounts, and it is said that the information she gave included the classified true name and counterintelligence activities of a US intelligence operative. This is of course a problem regardless of how important this operative was, but it is said that this information she shared had the potential to cause serious damage to United States national security. It truly is an absolutely wild story, and Monica is still out there on the run, hiding from the consequences of her betrayal betrayal and espionage. In our number 2 spot today we have Irene of Athens. Taking it back to the Byzantine Empire, Irene of Athens was the mother of Constantine VI, and while the pair co-ruled together for almost 2 decades, things ended in quite the tragedy. After the pair co-ruled, Irene did go on to rule on her own from 797 to 802 CE, but you might be wondering how she managed to outrule her son. Well, Irene, the ambitious ruler, wanted full control all to herself, so she asked for the help of some political allies to pull off a scheme against her own son. She began to lead a conspiracy against him to try and get him out of power. The duo did end up reconciling their relationship, but this is not where the story ends. In 786, the public began to turn their backs on Constantine because he had decided to divorce his wife and instead marry his mistress. Irene saw this as a second chance and once again chose to conspire against her own son. Honestly, fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, this lady did not care. Here's where things in the story get exceptionally gory though. Irene not only ordered the arrest of her son, but also ordered that his eyes be gouged out. Yep, that's how good old Mumsy came into power. Finally, in our number 1 spot today we have Boy Jones. Okay, I've heard of people being called Boy Jones before, but little did I know Boy Jones was a very real and very creepy person. His full name was Edward Jones, and this little rascal basically stalked the Queen from 1838 to 1841. He managed to break into Buckingham Palace, and we aren't just talking about once, we are talking about many times. He knew exactly where to go and what to do, and once in the castle, well, he would hide under the Queen's sofa, he would sit on her throne, and worst of all, he would go through her clothing, like a little creep. He even went as far as to steal her clothes, which is just stupid, of course. Taking evidence of your crimes is bad practice. Thankfully, he did finally get caught, but man, a few years of sneaking in and sitting on the throne. That's crazy.
Number 10, Family Feud. After making countless lists about kings and queens and learning about the lengths they go to gain power, it shouldn't come as a surprise to learn that Emperor Nero did some pretty messed up stuff to secure his position of power. Though he would later become an absolute menace to Roman society, he might have picked up this whole violent seizure of power idea from his very own mother, since she pulled a stunt just to get Nero's foot in the door, so to speak. You see, Nero was never supposed to become emperor, but when Emperor Claudius married his niece Agrippina, Nero's mother, she convinced Claudius to adopt Nero as his very own son, which he did. Mysteriously, Claudius died shortly after all this went down, which meant that Nero was now in line to inherit the throne. Nero became emperor at 17, and in an effort to secure his place of power, he got the bright idea to eliminate anyone who might try and come for his seat of power, and so he poisoned his stepbrother and later had his mother eliminated as well because he saw how she took out Claudius and he didn't want to meet the same fate. I guess you could say that this was the beginning of the end for the people of Rome and for Nero himself. Number 9, a whole lot of money. This guy was like the Sun King of France, or I guess the OG because that came way later. But anyways, in the early morning of June 18th in 64 CE, a huge fire broke out, and this blaze burned for 9 days, destroying 14 of Rome's districts and severely damaging 7 others. A large portion of Rome was leveled from the fire. Many citizens lost everything, but rumors started to break out that perhaps Nero was the one who started the fire in the first place. Why? Well, this rumor started after the emperor decided to build an opulent palace for himself that took up 100 acres. Rather than use the Roman treasury to rebuild the city, he spent it on building his dream palace that he named Domus Aurea, or the Golden House. This palace was so expensive to build that Nero was forced to devalue the Roman currency in order to stretch his money. This didn't really mean much to him, but for the rest of the people, this was devastating to the economy. So to explain their misfortunes that arose after the fire, they blamed the emperor, claiming that he was the one who started the blaze, therefore rumors. Historians are still uncertain if that's true or not, since at the time of the fire Nero wasn't even in Rome, but he could have hired someone to carry out the plan, so who knows. Though we may never truly know, but honestly, I wouldn't put it past him. Before we continue talking about the things that made Emperor Nero a messed up dude, let me first take a moment to ask you guys to consider leaving a like on this video if you're enjoying it so far, and consider subscribing to the channel to stay a part of the hive, because we love that. Number 8, the Shaving Festival. This is like totally Sweeney Todd in my head. Anyways, in many cultures, there are coming of age celebrations. There's the quinceañera, the bar mitzvah, the bat mitzvah, and plenty of others around the world. Back during the rule of Emperor Nero, he came up with his very own version of a coming of age type of celebration, and it was thrown in honor of his beard. Yes, Nero created an entire festival to honor his facial hair. This takes me right back to grade 8 when all the boys were like, do you see it? Do you see it? Or like putting mascara on their mustaches? True story. In 59 CE, when Nero was 22 years old, he finally started getting enough facial hair to warrant being shaved. To honor this big event in his life, he invented Juvenalia, or the Games of Youth. This large festival was commissioned all because this guy was going to shave. Now, I'm not someone who grows facial hair like that, so I don't know if shaving your face for the first time is actually a big deal or not. Is it, Chris? Is shaving your face for the first time a big deal? It can be. Alright, there we go. But anyways, this Juvenalia festival became a showcase for the performing arts. Every kind of theatrical performance was present at this festival, and Nero was known to have participated in some performances, but we'll get to that in a minute. Let's jump to the next point. Number 7, public performances. Let's talk about Emperor Nero, the actor. Nero always had a love for the arts. Many historians believe that if he never became emperor, then he would have become a performer, and some even think his dead dream of becoming a performer is what may have fueled his tyranny in the first place. Wanted his Oscar moment so bad. More than Leonardo DiCaprio. More than anything. And when Agrippina passed away, he found his chance. Nero wanted his popularity to rise, so he began to put on performances of songs he'd written in public. Cringe. His active pursuit of the arts did the exact opposite, however. Roman nobles absolutely despised professional actors and actresses, so to see their leader do such a thing was an embarrassment. He even arranged his diet and activities around his artistic endeavors. Despite some of the more gritty details of this cruel emperor, his passion for the arts by all accounts was genuine. It was just super desperate, dude, like calm down. Number 6, personal hype men.
Rejected! Yeah, you just got rejected! R-E-J-E-C-T-E-D, rejected!
I hope you enjoyed that Zoe 101 reference, and yes, it is somehow related to Emperor Nero. Did I think I would ever use Zoe 101 and Emperor Nero in the same sentence ever in my life? No. No, I didn't. Goes to show we can't plan life, it just happens. But Nero wanted to make sure that no matter where he went or what happened, that he would always feel like he'd accomplished something awesome. So he hired his own little cheerleading squad of personal clappers. Well, not quite, there's some details missing. When Nero visited Alexandria, he was very impressed with the fashion in which the Egyptians clapped. So he summoned men from Alexandria and made sure more than 5,000 men learned the Alexandrian styles of applause. Then he made them do so vigorously when he sang, "You're my wonderwall, clap for me." The men had noticeable thick hair and no rings on their hands so they wouldn't get, beat up, so they could keep clapping. Number 5, Antichrist. Was Nero the Antichrist? Well, a lot of people like to think so. Put someone really evil on earth and that question always seems to appear somewhere. After Nero took his own life in 68 AD, spoiler alert, many people believed that it was a cover-up and that he was still alive. Some men even came forward claiming to be Nero himself. Some of these men even stepped forward and sang in public like he used to do. Each of these men were punished, but rumors of his demonic survival continued. Prophets foretold his return, though that may have been more of a metaphor than in a literal sense. Nero was one of the most monstrous people of the time, so it's not surprising to think he is evil. From biblical forces to his crucifixion of Christians, which we'll get to later, the personification of the Antichrist was said to arise in the form of an emperor, which made Nero really match up quite well with that whole thing, so who knows. Number 4, messed up love. So of course, Nero had his fair share of mistresses, but according to rumor, there was none closer than Mummy Dearest. That's right, we got some Oedipus Rex action right now, but that was most likely a rumor perpetuated against a hated tyrant, but still, who can be sure? He and his mother often rode together in a litter and emerged with suspicious stains on their clothes, alleging what they might have done inside the litter. He also took up a mistress who looked a lot like his mother, which added fuel to the fire. Freud would have had a field day. But whatever love was between them would expire in 59 when Nero plotted to have his mother killed. His string of marriages were just as horrendous. His first wife, Octavia, he drove to take her own life. The second he kicked to death while she was carrying. The third was his former mistress, whose husband he forced to take his own life so she would be free to marry him. Then there was Pythagoras, who was Nero's fave ex-slave. In 64 AD they kind of married and Nero dressed as the bride. Nero also married another man named Sporus, who he also took away his manhood, should I say, so that he could be more of a woman in 67 AD. He took after his uncle Caligula when it came to taking advantage of the wives of his senators, which brings us to number 3, animal games. I know, you know where I'm going with this. If you know where this is going, trigger warning folks, this man was warped if you hadn't figured that out. As I was saying, he was a really big fan of putting his senators into uncomfortable positions, putting them through massive ridiculous orgies, but he also devised an utterly horrendous and bizarre sex game where he would dress up as an animal covered in animal pelts, come out of a cage and attack men and women tied to stakes. But then when he got his fill, he would go to one of his husbands to finish the job. In a way, he kind of sounds like an OG furry if furries were violent, but at the same time, Nero took his fetish way farther than anyone was comfortable with. Consent is sexy unless you're an emperor apparently, who literally takes lives if he doesn't get his way. He also allegedly had booths set up along the river he traveled filled with mechanisms for pleasure, and concubines role-playing innkeepers for his pleasure. That could be a rumor, but honestly I wouldn't put it past him. Number 2, night lights. Just when you think things have gotten as worse as they could get, it gets worse. But of course, this is Nero we are talking about, not Robert De Niro. He's a nice guy. They didn't have electricity back then, obviously, right? So at night they had to have a way of lighting up the night. Now, most logical people would be like, yeah, let's light a few torches, use some fire, but Nero had a darker idea that conveniently humiliated and tormented the people he hated the most, the Christians. When Rome burned, Nero went on to shift the blame to the Christians. Thousands of the followers were rounded up and punished in incredibly cruel ways, but most notably he built pyres, covered them with tar, and used them as torches for an imperial festival. Amongst the burning bodies, he had naked dancers come out and frolic around the poor victims. Going back to the Antichrist thing we mentioned earlier, I think this really makes for an open and shut case. And last one, time to go. Okay, let's do a quick recap here. Bestiality, matricide, unalived his first wife and his second along with his kid. He basically bankrupted Rome by building his golden palace, raised taxes to pay for it, violated consent in so many brutal ways. Nero to zero. Am I right, folks? The emperor's Rome began to crumble and his officials were not happy. He would soon be declared public enemy number 1. Not long after a Roman governor renounced Nero and his legion was defeated in Germany, it was only a matter of time for the tyrant. The Praetorian Guard charged with guarding the emperor himself renounced him, and he was officially declared an enemy of the people by the Senate on June 8th in 64. Nero knew he was done for, so rather than face the masses and account for his crimes, Nero took his own life to beat them to it. His last words were apparently, "What an artist dies in me." And he died with his current mistress at his side. She ensured he at least had a very decent burial, but that was that for the tyrannical ruler.